My guess is that it's a result of a certain kind of consumerism. One way of thinking about it is it's a way of trying to make God real in your life, as if God isn't real unless you make him real. And so you got these techniques for sort of creating the right sort of feelings in your life, because if you don't have the right feelings, you'll feel anxious that somehow God is not in your life because you're feeling bad or something. That's part of the one chapter about how you don't have to feel inner joy all the time. Sometimes you feel sad. That's okay.
Yeah.
But if you've got a technique for sort of getting all excited all the time, then that can sort of be a way of reassuring you that you're really in good with God. And then you have a whole church that sort of tells you, this is how you get in good with God. Just do this practical stuff. And then you'll feel right with God. And that's what we do all Sunday, is making sure you feel right. It's a certain kind of consumerism. It is tied, I think, to that good intention that people have. They want to be good Christians, but that's a desire about ourselves. And what we need to do is straighten out our desires so that our desires are about God and our neighbors. Then Christ takes care of ourselves.
I see. Because when I read the list of the 10 practical things you don't need to do in the table of contents, I'm like, I think you're really onto something. I think you've really tapped into what makes people anxious. What I've been surprised by, though, was I don't know if the solution to basically have a Bible-centric Luther view is going to be sufficient enough. I don't want to be, the inhospitable host, but I wonder if that's not going to be hospitable enough. And part of it is because there's this sense, and I think you say it about as well as anyone I've read to argue this point. So I think you're very clear on this. You make the point, you say to anyone who reads this book, I say, don't believe any of this stuff just because I'm saying it. Please do think critically. I mean, I love that so much. Think critically. And that includes thinking critically about what I say in the book. I mean, so great. Too many authors don't say, hey, look, think about me too. I might be in that same line of people who are telling you things that might not line up. And then you go on to say, above all, search the scriptures to see if things are so. Bad theology can't stand up against the scriptures and doesn't fare well under the gaze of critical thinking either. And here's my question for you.
Okay.
Is there any way to read Scripture that's not already influenced by some kind of theology or set of assumptions? So it seems like you're saying don't read the Scriptures as a new evangelical, rather read them as a neo-Lutheran. But then you kind of say, Scripture's enough, don't worry about anything else. But is that possible? Is the answer that the Scriptures of the Bible are enough because we always bring something to it?
Well, it's certainly true. We always bring something to reading Scripture. We bring our lives as it's already been shaped, but of course our lives are already partly shaped by Scripture, by the theological tradition we're part of. We always do bring our theology to Scripture, but of course our theology can be more or less scriptural. Now, I think it's true that if you're, say, Eastern Orthodox, if you're deeply involved in the Church Fathers, reading people like St. Augustine and Gregory of Nyssa, you're not going to have these problems that I'm talking about in the book. Likewise, if you're Lutheran. Likewise, if you're actually a Calvinist, you won't have these problems. It's a certain branch of evangelicalism that has this problem. I think it's actually, bad theology. There are various ways of having good theology. Luther, I think, cuts right to the heart of things, but you don't have to be a Lutheran to be a good Christian.
Right. But do you have to be a Lutheran or an Augustinian to have good theology?
I think, there's a number of different ways of having good theology. I think Luther's got something absolutely right that is terribly important for evangelicals to know at this moment in our history. Yeah.
And buckle that down for us. What is it that Luther provides that can be this antidote to a kind of nervous, anxious evangelicalism of today?
It's what he calls quite simply the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
The notion that there's a story about who Jesus is, and this story is good news for us, and it's the way that God gives himself to us.
Right.
Because the story also contains a promise, like, this is my body, it's given for you. You hear that, folks? For you. So here is God giving himself to you. You receive him and say, now you know that something is absolutely fundamentally right with your life because God has done this and said so. And, who are you to call him a liar about that? now you are free to go serve your neighbor, and you don't have this performance anxiety. So that gospel law stuff that Luther does and talks about, I think, is just enormously helpful in clearing away anything that smacks of this performance anxiety that we tend to have.
Well, Phil, thanks so much for being on the show. Folks, if you're interested in the book, he's just as lively and as clear in the book as he is on air. So, Phil, thanks so much. The book is called Good News for Anxious Christians, 10 Practical Things You Don't Have to Do. If you yourself feel that sense of anxiety, if you yourself feel that sense of wonderment about if it's all enough, this might be a conversation that's going to be very helpful for you, or if you have friends that feel those same things. So, Phil, thanks for being on. And people can connect with Phil online and can find the book at all your book retailers. Thanks again for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye. Hey, that's an interesting conversation, I think, for all of us to have. And as I said to Phil, for me, the issue is those are the right questions, and they really tackle at it. I just don't know that the answer is to go back to an old articulation.
Yeah, there's a reason why that change has happened
of the way the story went.
Yes.
And I tried to raise that with him there, and I sort of feel like that Lutheran notion, and part of this is that I've grown in faith here in Lutherville, right, in Minnesota, where it's so strong. I think that's embedded with a sense of struggle. But what I like about what Phil is willing to do is he's willing to say, look, this is my take, tell us yours as well. And that's the kind of thing that we need more in our spirituality, right? That's the kind of thing that we need more often, because I think that far too many Christians are anxious about it all, that it doesn't seem to work. It's my vantage point. From my vantage point, I would say then the solution is not to return to a previous version, but is to keep going to a future version.
Yes.
Not because we're going to answer every generation's questions, but it just doesn't feel like enough of a fresh approach to say, oh, people 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, they had it figured out and we lost it. And it's a little unfair to talk about it, after we're done. I feel a sense from reading the book and then from listening that that's some of the assumption, that if you have the theology of these folks who came previously, you won't have these problems.
Yeah.
But we wouldn't have this new burgeoning theology if there weren't problems there.
Yes.
And I think that's a fair question, because I happen to think this is all shaped by cultural construct, what we assume about the world. And so the stories that we read in the Bible don't just sit there as scripture alone.
Yeah, just saying read the Bible and that'll solve everything, that is not an answer.
Yeah. And maybe I'm underplaying. I think Phil is more sophisticated than how I'm playing it here. But it sure seems like there's a sense that the Bible is enough to challenge our theology. And the reason, again, to sort of play out why I think that's not enough is that reading, in the church that I'm a part of, we read the Bible out loud as our sermons for the last 10 years. And I've read whole books of the Bible and whole chapters in a sermon out loud with a community of people. And you'll have 150 people that will have 150 different takes on what that's saying.
Yeah.
So the idea that somehow Scripture alone can accomplish it is what I find to be an intriguing argument. And we'd only promised to keep Phil on the show for 2 segments, and I cheated him into a third, so we couldn't ask him. But I tried to sort of raise that question, and I think it's not because I think the Bible's a problem. I just think it's not supposed to be sufficient. I don't think the Bible was ever supposed to be enough. Now, I think he's right that we shouldn't have to sort of pursue our experiences and let our experiences tell us if we're Christian enough. And I know, John, you come out of a tradition.
Yeah.
The sidekick tradition here is one that tends to put a lot of emphasis on someone's personal experience as being an indicator.
Oh, yeah. His book basically speaks to that culture that I grew up in.
Yeah.
Every one of those things he says not to be anxious about, I was anxious about.
Yeah, it really does strike it.
Yeah.
So strike at it. But you were never tempted to sort of return to a 500 or 1,500-year-old tradition to be the solution to your anxiety.
No. I mean, it was, a way that you could, be intellectually sound in your beliefs, but also have more of a mystical understanding of the world.
Yeah. And that's what I think has produced some of it too, is that people want it not to be so I'm air quoting now, so by the book.
Yeah.
That they want it to be more lively. You want it to be more engaging than that.
Well, there's a reality to God, and not just like a belief in words on a page, but that there's this existence that God lives with you and right. a deeper connection.
Yeah, I wish I had asked Phil about that, about this notion that you don't want God to simply have been active in the world.
Yeah.
You want God to be currently active in the world.
Right.
But I think what he's trying to argue, to be fair to him, is, well, that's all about what empowers you in your life. That's not something that makes you right with God.
Sure.
Which is interesting. Maybe the new evangelicalism and kind of Pentecostal evangelicalism does try to argue, well, that's what makes you right with God, is that you're experiencing these things or living out these realities.
Oh, yeah, and I do feel that people do feel that threat that if they're not having these things, then that something's wrong.
Yeah. And you know what kind of is bathing all of my thinking in this is, I used to believe that God was more finicky than I now think God is.
Yeah.
I used to think God's really quite particular. And I think there's a way to read the Bible. You could get those answers out of there.
Sure.
Like, I'll tell you what, you don't cross at the wrong intersection. You know what I'm saying? Like, God's quite particular about everything, and God is not going to be pleased.
Yeah.
But I don't think that anymore. I think that that's just not a way to measure. And I think that's what sort of is always coming up in my allergies in conversations like that, is I don't like the notion that somehow if you don't do this or that God's not going to be pleased.
Yeah.
And I try to write that in my, about that in my own books. Hey, if you want to pick up this book, come over to the Block Party, 46th and Blaisdell. I've got a copy of it right here. We'll hand it out today. 46th and Blaisdell at 6 o'clock today. Hey, we'll stick around for the Right On Doug Pagitt Radio, on the AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota.
Hard-hitting interviews, news-making guests, and incisive analysis. It's on Meet the Press this Sunday. We invite you to tune in this week for the very best in political debate. Exclusive interviews with the world's newsmakers and roundtable discussions with the leaders in the fields of journalism, politics, and history. If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press. Sunday nights from 6 to 7 on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota.
Everyone has that stain or two where the coffee spilled or your little one dumped oatmeal on the carpet. In my house, we seem to have those whoops moments daily. No one fixes the whoopsies like Zero Res Carpet Care. Only Zero Res uses patented empowered water to clean and sanitize carpets. And only empowered water leaves zero residue.
Call Zero Res for the AM 950 3-room special, 651-779-8888. That's 651-779-8888. Zero Res. Spell it backward or forward, it spells the same.
Hi, I'm Peter Solak of Woodland Stoves and Fireplaces with something I'd like to share with you.
Thanks, Woodland Stoves. We were looking for a fireplace insert this fall to help with our very inefficient fireplace, so we went to Woodland Stoves, and the service was phenomenal. The staff went out of their way to explain things and make sure that we got exactly what we needed. After looking at a few displays, we were able, with a little help, to figure out that we needed an energy-efficient soapstone fireplace that would help heat more than just the one room. We love it, and it's got our heating bill. And there's hardly a day lately that we don't have a fire going. Thank you, Woodland Stoves.
Stop in and see and feel how cozy a fire can be. We have over 30 working units on display at 2901 East Franklin Avenue in Minneapolis, where Riverside and Franklin meet, or online at woodlandstoves.com. Enjoy an environmentally smart fire from Woodland Stoves and Fireplaces. Out of the ordinary products and services since 1977.
Homelessness and HIV. Often there's a direct connection. Joshua found himself without food, money, or anything at all. On a particularly cold evening, a social worker found Josh huddling by an exhaust vent and brought him to a nearby shelter. After a short conversation,